VDI workload with great acceleration driven by what's happened in our world in the last 10 months. I talk to customers pretty much every week. They all say the same thing. This is becoming an enterprise class footprint in either my data center or my cloud. And it's caught everybody by surprise, because if you think about virtual desktop infrastructure and where it has come from, if you look back a couple years, VDI, first of all, was largely on-premise. Last year, VDI was about a $1.6 billion market on-premise and about a $400 million market in the cloud. So 75% of it to 80% of it was on-prem based. And the other is VDI has been kind of a fallback. It's been a tier 2 or even a tier 3 workload in the enterprise. It's what you used if you were a new employee at a company and they didn't have your laptop yet, or your laptop was busted and IT had to give you something to work with, or maybe you're an exec with a $3,000 laptop you don't want to take on vacation and have it fall in the pool or stolen off a plane, or have somebody stick a USB key into it. And that's kind of been changing with the increase of attention on security and compliance and mobility. But some things really changed last year when Microsoft got really aggressive around this space. They really raised the visibility. They're not the only game in town, but they really did raise the visibility when they came out with their WVD or Windows Virtual Desktop offering in Azure, which changed some things both technologically and business-wise. You know, they started using Windows 10 multi-user as the operating system instead of Windows Server, which slashed the software licensing. They allowed you to bundle in your RDS CALs, or they removed the need for RDS client access licenses if you're using their WVD offering, which up until that point, people have been paying $5, $6, $7 a month per user every month, and that goes away. And so they made a really interesting business and technology mix that increased the focus. And then we all saw what happened January, February, March of this year. And now we've got enterprises that are saying, I had been doing VDI as that tier 3 support metric. And so it was a nice little workload, put on maybe an HCI box in the corner of my data center. And now I got 5,000 users to put on that, and it's crushing my infrastructure. And this is kind of where we're going. I just saw some numbers today from Evaluator Group that said one of the single greatest response they got about which of these workloads that have changed since COVID-19 have come are here to stay, and it's the remote work and VDI. People are not going to go back. I wouldn't want to be in the business of knocking on doors to sell PCs anymore, because the entire workload footprint is changing. So what we're hearing from our customers, what we're hearing from the analysts, is that number one, VDI is moving upstream. It's becoming a tier 1 application. Put it this way: when I grew up in Texas, I had a little brook or a creek that ran behind the house, had a little bridge over it. I could run over it. I'd ride my bike over it. Me and my friends could go over it. That's kind of like a small footprint of VDI users sitting on a piece of infrastructure. But if you had 5,000 people jump up and down on that bridge, everybody's getting wet. And that's what happens when you take what an infrastructure has had a few hundred people on it and you say, now I have thousands of people to put on it. So it's getting higher expectations. It's demanding a lot more resources, and the data footprints are exploding. And it's happening at probably a faster adoption rate than most workloads, be it ERP, CRM, or et cetera, saw. I mean, it's really been forced into this unnaturally fast time scale of, I used to have 100 remote users. I need to make it 5,000, and I need to do it right now. And I need it everywhere. One of the interesting things that we're seeing is customers that say, I have a global footprint of users. They need virtual desktop infrastructure access, but I can't have users in London, Frankfurt, and Singapore with 350 milliseconds each way connection time to Redmond or Mountain View. So customers are putting distributed workspaces around the world. Pick your cloud provider of choice, or mix them. So I have 10 different VDI workspaces. A number that I constantly hear is 30 milliseconds. They want a 30 millisecond round trip between their users and their cloud-based workspace, and which means they're now juggling a bunch of workspaces. And that means there's got to be a change in some of the infrastructure, and that change is probably going to be here to stay. ESG did a study earlier this year and says, does a VDI or desktop as a service, is that possibly going to be your primary, if not exclusive, means of desktop consumption and delivery? More than half said, yeah, that's where we're going. We're moving away from boxes on desks. We're moving to VDI. It's a lot more secure, and most of them think it's secure, but one of the things they're finding is it's not easy. I mean, it's got a lot of goodness, but it's tough. The same study that they did found out that 93% of enterprises that have done virtual desktop infrastructure, either in the past or they're looking to do that, are forced to use third parties to do their deployment and management of those environments. The two key reasons they call out is we don't have the manpower, and we don't have the competency. I mean, they have some really great people that have been doing Windows and x86 for a few decades. But those same people are not up to speed yet on VDI infrastructure as a whole. They're not up to speed on cloud infrastructure. They're certainly not up to speed on multi-cloud and hybrid infrastructures tied together around this workload. And that's the challenge that's being given to them. So that's why, I know a lot of people on this call follow NetApp. You saw we made some acquisitions this year, and we made some announcements. And one of the companies we acquired named CloudJumper in April, we released that product and call it Virtual Desktop Services. The reason we did that is because, I mean, just to be straight, VDI is hard. VDI is complex, does good stuff. But the procurement, the startup, the provisioning, the management, the immense amount of time that you have to spend watching it and managing it. You think you have an application running in the cloud that takes X degree of management. Well, if you have 1,000 users, you might have 10,000 applications running at the same time in the cloud. But they grab resources and gobble up data like you wouldn't believe. It takes a lot of monitoring and management when you get it at scale, and that's tough. So that's why we've decided that we need to invest in this space. For the last 20, 30 years, we've been investing in data and management infrastructure for the enterprise. We view this as a new type of enterprise class application. It's the end user compute footprint. It needs the kind of storage and data management and infrastructure management that we've been bringing to other applications like SAP. Now EUC, or end user computing, has grown up and needs that.
Charles, I have a question.
Yes.
So we saw a huge spike of VDI as a service, or virtual desktop in the cloud, or whatever it's called, because of COVID. Okay,
yes.
So the many enterprises got this problem with the lockdown and everything, so they had to act quickly and they moved to the cloud. But actually, now they are reorganizing everything, and one of the biggest concern is cost. Everything that is cost-based is something that they are researching. So, and the other big part of COVID is digital transformation.
Yes,
so
yes.
Most of the processes that we for which we need a desktop today is that because the processes are based on old stuff. In the moment we are moving to something new like SaaS-based applications and online office tools and blah, blah, blah. So everything will be web-based. So a Chromebook will be more than enough for 90% of the people. Why do you think this is a sustainable business in the years to come?
For the reasons that you have just said. Because you're right. As things move, the requirements are changing at the user level. You hit the nail on the head when you say a Chromebook is enough. But, interesting enough, we have found over the years that individual personal applications, individual productivity applications like Microsoft Office, for example, and Adobe, those have not been successful in a web format. They're very successful in a desktop and a client format. And what VDI does is kind of bridges that gap. It gives you the power of a client-based application and device with a web-based access and delivery. And that's kind of the best of both worlds. Look, I'm not an application developer of Office. If you have ever used PowerPoint or Excel or Word web version, and if you use the desktop version, you know what the differences are. You know the definition of the word frustration. At least I do. And when I now can use Office or Excel or PowerPoint or Adobe or Creator or, it's what is now called Creative Suite, and if I can use that in a VDI implementation, I'm still using a Windows desktop version of it, but it's somewhere else in the world. So that's what this is a bridge between those two. And Enrico, you're a great straight man, because cost is one of the reasons that COVID is one of the reasons that people have been forced over to this VDI implementation. Cost is, I think, the reason they're going to stay, because they're realizing the endpoint devices can be much lighter weight. I mean, they can be tablets. We've got one of our customers that, when I show you what we do here, he made the comment to me, I was able to provision an entire cloud-based environment from the console of my Tesla at a truck stop. That's kind of hard to do normally. So I think it's that combination of having the power that you were used to in a device and having it with a web-based access with a low-cost terminal and combined with better security. Mike, you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just add on that the promise, as you point out, of SaaS apps actually is universal access, right? Any browser, any internet connection of decent value, I can get there. The downside of SaaS apps is that it's very hard to integrate and choose your mix of applications, right? So the reason the Windows desktop, whether it's virtual or physical, still exists today is that we have 16.5 million Windows applications, and people pick and choose the parts that make their job capable. So I think the virtualized desktop, as Chuck pointed out, is the bridge component. It's more secure. It's universally accessible. It's the best of both of those worlds. We are de-emphasizing the importance of the Windows physical device, but we're still providing the working environment, which I don't think is going to transition to an all SaaS world overnight. And unfortunately, with COVID, they didn't give us 18, 20 years to get there. It had to happen. Right. Remote work had to happen overnight.
As a VDI guy for many years, I've recently seen, prior to COVID, I met COVID as put a change. We saw a lot of customers that had previously adopted VDI start to look at modern management techniques that are being delivered by Microsoft, where actually it became quite attractive to have a modern Windows 10 device, Surface Pros, anything like that, that the users actually want to get that device in their hands. But then we're layering on the modern management techniques to mean that actually we want to stop having, we've got zero trust on the edge. We want to lock down the data rather than locking down the Windows desktop. So I completely understand with WVD and VDI a growth in the future for legacy-based applications, probably moving to application presentation rather than desktop presentation. That would allow you to use things like Teams natively on the local device rather than trying to muck around getting it working on VDI. But is it just those legacy use cases to support it? Or are you seeing people just going, yeah, we're not going to look at modern management, we're just going to move a desktop into the cloud or something like that?
I think that I see both. I see, we work with a pretty wide array of customers. So if you look at what I will call the commercial, which is more the medium level enterprise, they are probably saying it's business as usual, Windows applications, but I do it in straight VDI. And some of our larger companies that say I'm in the midst of a total digital transformation, then to your point, Barry, they may say let's look at re-architecting the whole thing.
Yeah, I think the commitment that Microsoft made to WVD was particularly because they didn't feel like that transition was going to be an all or nothing type situation. They wanted to give the companies the ability to mix those. But the important point is what you let off with is it's much more secure. We can protect the castle if we move all the really important data and the applications that we're trying to defend up into an environment where we're not trying to chase down 17 different versions. We have one prospect we talked to. They have about 7,000 different combinations of physical devices and application mixes, drivers, printer access, all that kind of stuff. They want to be out of that business. They want all the important stuff to live up in Azure in their case, and just leave the physical devices as the access point. Put those in the closet when they break and get the new one and keep going. So I think that's it's much more of a gradual transition to a modern type approach where all the applications are endpoint aware. We're not going to get there in a very short period of time. So this allows us to mix and match and let people move at their own pace.
But understand that it's not that we're trying to tell people to go do VDI. It's that we're being told from 3 different axes that they are doing it. We're being told from our customers they're doing it. We're being told from the analyst community that this is what they're researching and seeing in their numbers. And we're being told from our hyperscaler partners, and we've got a pretty unique advantage of being nestled up pretty closely to Microsoft and Google and AWS. And they're telling us that their numbers are escalating significantly in terms of the VDI workloads in the cloud. When you're hearing it from 3 different angles, the people that are spending money with you, the people you're spending money with to tell you where people are going to spend money, and the people that you're going to market with, it seems that we've covered most of the bases. And I can argue do I think this trend will continue or be solid? The numbers say it will, but that's why we're making the investments that we are, and in particular the investments that we're making because our customers are having to make this shift, and it's hard for them. And so what we've looked at is how do we bring the same value to this application set that we brought to other applications and infrastructures, and that is this technology called Virtual Desktop Service. And one of the reasons it's kind of unique for us is this is a SaaS service from NetApp. This is NetApp providing a SaaS service that can be a global control plane for virtual desktop infrastructure, no matter where it is. It's a service that our customers can get access to, just like you would get access to Salesforce. You enter your user ID and password, and it will deploy for you your VDI infrastructure wherever you want it, Azure, Google, AWS, even on-prem. It will build the storage infrastructure, which, no secret, we prefer that be done. It's done in an integrated manner on NetApp ONTAP technology. It will deploy the Active Directory infrastructure for you. It will deploy the VMs and the user sessions, and it will connect all of your existing AD policies to your new virtual desktop environment. It takes what used to take weeks, and it boils it down to hours. And on an ongoing basis, it will do user management to tie those resources to your users and whatever resources they're allowed to get at in terms of applications, resource types, data, locations, and it'll even manage the application stack. So it doesn't just deploy the Windows virtual machines to do VDI. If you have 42 applications that are approved in your organization, you can install your application images, and it will keep them updated and in sync according to your policies. If you have new versions and updates and patches and releases, the tools within VDS can keep those up to date. If you have dependencies, like I got a new .NET release, it's going to affect these 12 applications, it can know that and apply the right updates for that. To the point of cost that Enrico brought up, it will also make sure that it manages the cloud spend for you, so you don't have a lot of waste. This workload happens to be one where there's a lot of cloud waste. You have 1,000 people sign on, and they do their work, and they don't sign off, and they go home. Guess what? There's pennies hitting the meter every minute that those machines are online that nobody's using it. So VDS has algorithms to do things like apply your policies that if you haven't interacted with your desktop at a certain point of time, it'll log you off. If you have a policy for a certain number of users to be on a given VM, let's say you're in Azure and you say I've got 10 standard users on a DS2 v3. That's my target to make the best use of that resource. As people start logging off or getting logged off because they haven't interacted, you don't want to end up with hundreds of VMs that have 1, 2, or 3 users on them. You want to make sure that you're taking active steps to consolidate users into the smallest number of VMs and get as many VMs at 8, 9, 10 users as you can. And VDS will do that for you. And this all happens through a SaaS portal. I can literally have an environment where I am doing deployments and management and applying policies across AWS, Google, and Azure at the same time with the press of a button, as if it was all one cloud. That's the kind of stuff we've been doing for enterprise class applications and storage for a long time, and we've now applied a lot of the same technologies and logic to the VDI world. Mike's going to show you in a minute. One of the key things I'll show you is there's a concept that we've come out with called VDS sites, Virtual Desktop Service sites. The site concept says, hey, each of the hyperscalers has their own regulations. You can only have a certain number of VMs in an account. You can only do a certain number of API calls at a time, et cetera. They have their boundaries because that's how they manage their business. Doesn't always map to the customer. So we're going to allow you to do a logical grouping for your enterprise that's not bounded by what the hyperscaler says you can do. I can create a VDS site, if you will, that is my sales team. There's certain rules I want to apply to that. But I got salespeople all over the place. And maybe I use Google Cloud in Germany, and I use Azure in the UK, and I use AWS in the US, but my sales guys are everywhere. I can treat all those clouds, this grouping of users across all those clouds, as one, and do common management, common scale to the implementation of the resources that I give them, determine where they can and can't sign in, et cetera.
So you had a list of all the things that it managed. Does it also manage the images of like the servers or the desktops? Okay.
Yep, it'll manage what we call the underlying infrastructure. So think of storage, VMs, and network resources. It'll manage all that. It will then manage the Windows OS layer, so your images and your policies. It'll then manage the application stack that sits on top of that Windows layer, and the user and AD interconnectivity of it all.
So when it's time to apply Windows updates, how does that work? Is it just one image, or is it all of them?
It can be. Mike, you can have different policies, but Mike, is that one of the things you're going to show is applying?
Yeah, I think, yeah, one of the things that you can do is you have a choice. We see image to incremental change as sort of a spectrum, and you can choose which one you want to be on. So some of our customers really do it image by image, and they'll swap images out for their target environment to do things like patches. But the other approach is to say, okay, I like where my machines are. They're very, they're very well configured. I want to apply incremental change like patches, like version updates for applications. They want to change those via automation as opposed to having to swap the whole thing out, because there's a lot higher risk to swapping out the images sometimes. So we have both of those options. We'll touch on a couple of those typical tasks as we go through it here. So I just want to touch a couple of things that Chuck actually talked about to show you those in action. And then we can take a couple questions on how it does some of those pieces. So the first thing to note is that we have an environment here where it's actually tracking information over time. We're going to enhance this with our Cloud's Insights piece, which we'll mention down the road here a little bit. But the idea is to give the administrator a SaaS version or remote access, remote support version of the tool set that they need to support end users now that they're in a virtualized environment. So a couple of things that Chuck mentioned, which are kind of a big deal or a headache. One is to span these environments. So you can see I have a couple Azure and GCP choices here that I'm managing from one VDS instance, one credential set into a variety of environments, whether those multiple sites, multiple clouds, on-prem and then into a cloud. We're trying to make it as straightforward so you're not jumping in and out of different applications and tool sets regardless of the environment. The whole job for VDS is to do the automation orchestration underneath on the IaaS layer so the administrators can worry about applications and users and data. So let's look at the provisioning one of these. Starting from an empty, in this case, Google project or an Azure resource group or even Azure subscription, that's pretty daunting. There's a lot of parts and pieces. We touch authentication and users, storage layer, compute layer. There's a lot of stuff to do here. So one of the things that we try and do is use workflows, sort of these step-by-step tasks to do deployment tasks. So in this case, I'm starting with an empty Google project, and I have to enter some information. The first is the service account. We create that on the Google side so that we have an automated best practice, i.e. non-interactive account with limited permissions to do the automation task that we've designed so that we can get the benefit of automation, the speed, the consistency, without creating a security risk for ourselves. So we would set that up. The system knows based on who I'm aligning to, it's asking where do I want to put this. As Chuck mentioned, we start with one site. In most of these public clouds, it's a region or a region zone combination, and we choose where to start from, and then I'll talk about sites in a second. We can expand upon that, but we want to start with the terminology and the entities, the components that the public cloud provider provides, and the administrator doesn't have to know the details of how to designate all those for every machine we build, for instance. We collect that information, and once we know what we need to drive, the automation will pick all that stuff up. And then we simply walk through the wizard. I won't touch all the places here in the interest of time, but we collect information for accessing the local machines once we build them. Becky, to your point, once we have an image, we have an access point so that we can take the image that we've built within VDS here and then start using that as our template for driving multiple machines in various places. So depending on the technology stack and the hyperscaler, we collect information for those elements as well. We can choose which domain we're attaching to. Identity is provided, whether it's RDS on the non-Azure providers or with WVD, it's Azure AD and an existing AD. We do a connect to type technology where our service accounts are given limited rights into those domains so that once I've set up that relationship, I don't have to keep coming back and asking for credentials, and it doesn't bother me if an administrator happens to leave the company. He doesn't leave with the only capability to getting to some of these deployment modes, which you see a lot over time. If you're using templates or script-based stuff, the magic account disappears and you're in trouble. With our stuff, it's a best practice approach to use the service accounts. So we make choices there. We handle the SSL certification and the identity on the DNS side if you choose to, or you can override our stuff and choose your own certificate set, your own DNS scheme. The whole idea here, again, is to give a basic approach that is default, and then if you want to do higher customization, you can. Because this is an RDS slide, we can also choose how many of each role we want. RDS gateways and HTML5 portal capability for those who love to access everything from a browser. The HTML5 capability gives the end users to get there. So we can scale these out using, in this case, the Google load balancers. We can add multiple gateways. We can have multiple portals to get people in. So as you can see, we walk through all the steps here, and it takes about an hour once I've answered all these questions for a full RDS setup here in Google to be set up. Takes about the same amount of time to do an Azure setup with WVD and do all the configuration components, the networking, the VMs, be all set up so that we can start creating those either session RDS session hosts or WVD host pools to serve up end user applications and sessions. So the step of deployment, which as Chuck said can take a long time, we can, once we collect all the identifying information, we can do that pretty quickly for that piece.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is a deployment, does each deployment has its own broker interface, or do you have one broker interface for multiple public clouds?
Good question. So we use the native either RDS or WVD broker system in each of the clouds. So we will configure it and automate the interaction and the connectivity to it, but we don't do any overall brokering ourselves. So we just point it to the correct technology and then overlay our stuff for that piece.
Okay.
Yep. So just up to another example here, just switch to Azure just so that we can see the other setup for this. If I jump to the WVD tab, for those who are familiar with that type of technology, the core sort of organizing component of that is the host pool. The host pool allows me to create identical session machines, typically Win10 or Win10 multi-user machines, and we build those host pool out and let Microsoft handle routing my identity using my Microsoft 365 credentials down to those machines through their network. One of the benefits Chuck mentioned, one of the things we talked to a lot of people about is that as people have gone to this remote work concept, they've really taken advantage of the public clouds because of all the regions that they have and the networking that they've built in between, as well as the points of presence they've extended out in the field. That's kind of hard to beat for the cost that you have to provide. If you're running on a traditional data center or even an on-prem location, and now you have to host users around the world, a lot of people have turned to the hyperscalers to do that because you can piggyback on their network. Remember the days when I first started in this industry where 17, 18 hops between 3 or 4 peered network vendors was pretty common. We got nowhere near that 30 milliseconds Chuck was talking about, but you pretty much consistently get that out of the big boys now just because of their networks.
Hey, Mike.
Sure.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
So, and I think a few steps back you may have touched on it, but I don't think I caught it. So when you're talking about global scale, right, you're talking about all the different globally, I just knocked my glasses off. I'm getting all excited.
I've done that too. I was like, why I can't see anything anymore? Where'd my glasses go?
So when you're talking about global scale and all that, you are talking about building, and I think you did say this, building the load balancers and all that as part of the constructs. Is it also doing like GSLB, things like that, or is it doing locality detection based on where you're coming in so I can do proper placement, or does that not even play into this?
Well, so on the WVD side, Microsoft, the WVD SaaS service does that, right? If I'm in London, it's going to try and put me through the quote-unquote WVD front door in London, and then it has to get me back to where my host actually live. So there's not, there's some wisdom in that, right? Don't put your London users on a Singapore data center. You're going to ask, even though Microsoft has a great network, you're going to feel that latency. So they handle that. On the Google side, we actually combine our technology where we have the ability to put the gateways in these VDS sites Chuck talked about. We can lay down our parts, and then we use the front end pieces of the Google networking technology to say, okay, we want geo, we want it to figure out the closest geo place of our RDS gateways to there. So we combine our technology with the stuff that they've already done at scale, and they've done it securely. So we don't try and reinvent that piece, but we do again deploy it, and we configure so that the users don't have to, and the administrators more specifically, don't have to go through an architectural exercise to figure out which part of this works. We've done it for almost 20 years now, so we've pretty much figured out some of those headaches across the different vendors.
Cool, thank you. Again, I'm not very up on VDI, so this is good.
Yeah, I think it's one of the cardinal rule I learned. I mean, I came back to this industry after about 20 years, about 5 years ago. The rule hasn't changed. Keep the applications and data as close to the physical users as you can. Yeah. That was pretty straightforward. As Chuck said, before COVID, it was like, okay, if you live near the headquarters, you're in business. Otherwise, you get what you get. Now we're having to change that model because I just got notice today that our NetApp facility closest to me in Waltham, Mass. is closing. So that's not unusual. Companies are deciding that some real estate doesn't make sense. I need to start clustering those users using the footprint of one of the public cloud providers is probably the best way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. So just one more administrative task, and then we'll. Okay, let's look at one more administrator task before we go into some more of the complex stuff. Now, when working with, and this time in the Azure environment, when we need to add the capability for more resources. So let's say we have to add some users to an existing Windows Virtual Desktop host pool. We have the VDS setting for going into the host pools, and in addition to the information that we typically see here, so an overview of what the the characteristics of the host pool are, what they're set for in terms of maximum number of users, whether we're going to persist or use ephemeral disk on that type of stuff. We also, as you can see, have the app groups and can track active users here. But for this specific task, we're looking to add some hosts to a host pool. In this case, we can go to the session host screen, and instead of having to go out and figure out which Azure template we're going to use and then call in which image we want, all that information is already in our environment here as an administrator. So I'm just going to go over here and add session host. It's going to suggest the one that this pool was based on, but I can update that with a new set. So for example, if I want to go on a newer version of the Windows 10 or the Windows 10 with Office 365, I can do that. So we can select one of those. We can check a new machine size or the machine size we already had, as well as select the type of disk we want to run for the boot disk for the machine. Now, the interesting part here is that we can add as many machines as we want, and VDS will go through and do all the automation steps to build those out. So it's going to create the VMs, then it's going to add them to the domain so that they are part of the overall virtual desktop environment. And then finally, we're going to add them to the WVD host pool so that they are accessible for the WVD SaaS application to figure out where users should go, which ones to add on this. So it's a pretty straightforward task. We can do this in a couple of minutes here, and then the automation will take up probably 15-20 minutes, up to a half an hour probably if we're doing like 100 machines. So this is just a flavor of what the administrators are trying to do. I will point out that it's not all basic stuff from this perspective, that if we went back to these deployments, one of the challenges that we typically run into, and if we look at our site here, one of these concepts is I need to create this geographic spread and scale, or I need to build up in the same place, because as Chuck mentioned, I can tell you it's 12,000 API calls every 5 minutes at Azure, and you think, wow, that's a lot, until you have 6,000 machines and all of them are doing status checks and things like that. That 12,000 disappears in a little bit. So one of the challenges is we have all these components to work with in these public clouds. You can see all the parameters I'd have to build out by myself. My resource group, my location I can pick, that's pretty easy, but my resource group, my network, subnet, the ability to tie the subnet and resource group together for virtual machines. Some organizations like to split those. I need to be able to do the routing, the DNS information, all of the stuff that takes to define a new location can be a real pain in the neck to build out as an administrator. And if you make one mistake, that makes it hard to replicate that and make it accessible for end users. So what we do with sites is we let you start with a template, and then you have to fill in based on which cloud you're putting in. It asks you for all the information that we need to do these pieces. And then once we actually get all that information, the administrator can forget about it. They don't have to do that ever again. All you have to do is tell us, hey, this group of this host pool for WVD or this RDS collection for Google or AWS, that's going on site 3 or the US West site. And then you're done. It's a pointer for the administrator, and the rest of the stuff is done by the automation underneath. So it's not just a simple task that we handle for the administrator. Some of this complexity, some of this architecture, once you've done the work of figuring it out, you shouldn't have to do that work every time you want to build one VM. Because I've run into a lot of administrators who really were excited. They built out 100 VMs and found out that it was halfway around the world from where they intended those VMs to be, just because they didn't have the right parameter settings. They have to rebuild them. So part of the job of VDS is to take some of that complexity out of those environments, because it's not going to go away on its own. We have to, we have to build to the modern reality of where everybody's trying to work, and that polite phrase of remote work, which means your kitchen table to the coffee shop to wherever you can get an internet connection. Administrators have to live by that too. So we want to make this as simple as possible for them. So that was just a flavor of some of the administrative tasks. We'll touch on some of the support and data feedback stuff in a second, but I'll hand it back to Chuck if there aren't any questions.
With regard to the on-premises side of this, so if you did want to run it on your virtual infrastructure, sure. What are you doing for brokering there? Is it you? Yeah, so vSphere 6.7 and 7.0 are what we support. That's the native configuration for our NetApp HCI, but we have a number of customers that run pretty much any combination of that. We can talk to that hypervisor and use that API to do the provisioning.
What are you using for brokering at that point? So
we build up the RDS collections, and the brokers are set up automatically for that. There's different configurations for that, but the basic components, the RD roles, if you will, are parts of what VDS automates when we start from that. So we have a template for that configuration for each RDS collection, and you can expand that into HA and all that if you choose to, but it does all the basic configuration for RDS gateway through to the broker. The broker knows which machines belong to the collection, and users get assigned to that.
So I perceive a large amount of people that are going on the desktop as a service journey are people that already have some footprint of VDI on premises, which from my experience, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be Citrix or Horizon. What does the journey typically look like for customers that are coming to your solution if they've got one of those technologies today, but they're buying into the whole vision of where you're going with that multi-cloud management?
Yeah, I think it's I like it. I like the analogy of they've been pretty comfortable in their house and they really want to move to the brand new house, but they don't have a moving company. So we provide some of that information. To me, it breaks down into buckets of things you have to worry about. The user identity has to move, so that's typically from a traditional AD into a Azure AD if you're on on Azure. You can migrate your AD or extend your AD if you're on Google or AWS. So we help with make sure the users have the same information, make sure their data moves. Now we have the NetApp Cloud Sync tool. We can use that to move a lot of data and then just make sure that the ACLs are applied correctly for those users. The trickier part is if they're running Citrix or something like that, the profile tends to be tied to the Citrix piece. We try and get those migrated to FS Logics first because those containers are pretty well independent of everything else, and we can move those up into the cloud indirectly. And then probably the piece that varies the most, to be honest, is application library. Some companies have 9 applications, some have 922, and one of them is that inventory system that was written in 2002 and has barely been upgraded, .NET version to .NET version, and it's got all sorts of dependencies, and we have to help people unwind that. So I think those are the buckets that I usually worry about. And then, if there's other restrictions, mostly governance, change control, network restrictions, that factors into it, but I think it's making sure we understand what we're moving from a source side to a target side. We just helped move one big company on the construction space. They moved about 30,000 users. It took us 8 months to move everything because we did it in batches, but the users logged off on Friday afternoons, and the batch that moved, they logged in on Monday morning, and they were talking to a machine in Azure. So if you do it right, it's transparent to the user, but you do have to, point Barry, there is a carpenter's, architect everything twice and then start moving only when you're sure that the pieces work.
One final question, and kind of pulling back into the Azure NetApp files as well. There seems to be quite a USP that you guys have got around that FS Logic. It seems to be one of the recommended platforms on Azure files. Sure. You've now got this service. Does this have any integration with that NetApp file?
More so than integration, it automatically deploys. If you don't have one, we will deploy the capacity pool and the volume and do the wiring so that every time you build a machine, it points to the correct location for the FS Logic container. So as an administrator, you don't have to try and wire all those pieces together. Now, if you have an existing ANF, what we're really looking at is what's the SMP UNC path that we want to talk to. And if you have multiple locations, you may actually have different ANF instances that you want, pool 1 to talk to instance 1 of ANF and pool 2 to talk to instance 2. We handle that capability in VDS sites as well. You tell us that, hey, that's a different physical Azure region. I want a different UNC path to point my FS Logic containers for users to do. And that's not a trivial problem. We've talked to people who, they got into this, they had 400 users, as Chuck said. I can think of one customer, they have 4,200. Now they started out with a managed disk server, and now they're in a scramble to trying to move to ANF. And then their next step is going to be like, okay, well, I made that mistake in architecture. How do I manage this better? So I think there's some people that scrambled from January through April, and now they're either looking at budget, they're looking at complexity, and they're looking at permanence, to be honest, and saying, geez, I got to architect this so I can maintain it over the long term, because I can't keep putting this heroic efforts in to make the pieces I put together in a rush in the spring, making them work. It's tough to do that long term, and that's where VDS typically gets, we get adoption from that because we can inherit some of those structures like a existing WVD installation. We simply import that from the API, and then we take over managing it like we built it. So we can do a lot of stuff where people have started the journey, and we can meet them there, or we can help them move to a brand new setup if they choose to do that.
Okay. Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Did you touch on what desktop OSs are supported? Is it just Windows? Is it Linux? Can I run Server 2019 as a desktop?
Yeah, so your choice is basically the Windows family. We have had interest from Linux, so we're taking a look at it. No roadmap announcements to make on that, but it really is depending on licensing. So inside Azure, you have the choice of Windows 10 multi-user, with the WVD capability and built into those E3, E5 licenses from Microsoft 365. You also have the ability to run Windows Server if you choose to on Azure, but we have to use Windows Server 2016 and 2019 outside of Azure. The only exception to that is something like a Google Sole tenant instance where you can bring your own Windows 10 license. We can handle configuring those if you choose to, but that can't be multi-user by license. So that means it has to be one user. We always can run single user, single machine, or single, multiple users on the one machine, that pooled mode. We can run that in any of our environments. The licensing rules say that outside of Azure, if you're going to use Windows 10, we have to do it single user, single machine.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Thank
you. So we try and follow the rules. Microsoft's our friend, so we try and follow the rules.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at, the same thing, right? Run 2019 or 2016 and save on those cows. And
it's definitely a math game, and Microsoft certainly has made the math very attractive. So we try and respect that, but we also have ways to enable people who choose, they have an affinity for us at a Google Cloud platform for other reasons. We want to make sure that they're not losing out just because people are playing, specific licensing games.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. What Mike showed you there was pretty important, pretty powerful. What Barry alluded to was how does it tie to the rest of the infrastructure? How does it automatically set up Azure NetApp files, take advantage of it, scale it, provision disk when more is needed? Some of the things that Mike showed you, they really add up over time. We did a study. We had some engineers that provisioned a virtual workspace and did it manually and then did it with VDS. And then they managed it for a month to see what kind of time and hours are being put into that. What Mike showed you in terms of VDS can save about 70% of the man hours to provision and deploy and manage an ongoing workspace. There's an analyst firm called Server Storage IO who's actually developing a methodology already for what this new concept of global control planes can bring. And when we look at a 1,000-user environment, let's say 65% of them are online at any one time, and you've got a workload mix from 5% of what's called light, 10% at medium, 80% at heavy, which these are Microsoft definitions. So if you look at a WVD world, they consider if you're using Office 365, now Microsoft 365 and Outlook, you're declared a heavy user, and 5% is power, which might be a GPU type user. You can save about $1 million over 3 years for 1,000 users. This is real money that adds up in terms of the manpower that has to go towards managing a VDI environment for the long haul. And we think we're going to have some really significant value that we can deliver to our users here. Now, referring to the NetApp infrastructure, it's not just about the VDI layer. It's about all that stuff under it, like Becky brought up, the storage, et cetera, and how that data is protected. Because remember, this whole thing is in the context of VDI moving upstream, becoming really a tier 1 enterprise application, needing the kind of management and data backup and compliance and security that up until now has been the domain of ERP, CRM, manufacturing apps, and financial apps. One of the things that customers are really looking for is increased security in this VDI environment. Most users, 79%, according to ESG, say they believe that the VDI and DAS workspaces are more secure than the individual desktops, and that's factoring into their decisions. Now, if they think it's more secure, one of the things the IT team needs to understand is, my executive teams think this is more secure, I better make sure it is. So what are the things I'm doing around data protection, data security, et cetera? Mike, you saw a little bit, and he's going to show you another preview in just a second of Cloud Insights and how this has been integrated into VDS for the VDI workload. If you think about it, I mentioned this before, if you have thousands of users, you have a lot of stuff going on in the cloud. You have a lot of VMs being spun up and spun down and provisioned. You have thousands of people that are hitting data stores. Every one has got their own FSLogix container or roaming profile stored on disk somewhere. So you have a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces at one time. This is a really, think of how disjointed the workload was when everybody had their own computer, 1, 2, 3, 5,000 users. You put that all in one spot in the cloud, but you still have to be able to manage that. Cloud Insights is a really good tool to know what's going on in terms of my compute, my networking, and my storage. What are my error rates? What are my thresholds? What are my alerts? And when do I think I'm going to see a problem? And you don't want to see a problem because you have your London office calling and telling you they can't get at their data anymore. So we've integrated Cloud Insights with VDS. We make sure that VDS can take all of those parameters about what's happening at the user level with their session hosts and their applications and their networking connections and their storage. We pass a massive amount of data over to Cloud Insights. Cloud Insights uses its algorithms and logic to analyze it, to package it into dashboards, and to do some predictive analysis, and then send that back to the VDS console. So basically you see problems that might happen before they happen. Something similar, if you guys are familiar with cloud compliance, well, that's yet another part of the story that you can click and turn on cloud compliance. So you can have privacy controls, compliance, audit controls. You know, it's one of those things that people have said, I don't even try to do compliance at the desktop level. I got 5,000 desktops. I'm not going to be able to do PII and HIPAA and GDPR compliance on 5,000 things that are sometimes plugged in and sometimes not. I mean, architecturally, yes, you can. It's a nightmare. It's one of those boil the ocean things nobody ever does. So now, if you think about it, this is a big win potentially for the enterprise, because you're taking those 5,000 desktops and you're moving them into a single place where now you actually can see and scan and report on and manage that data. So cloud compliance as part of the stack, you provisioned it on Azure NetApp files, you're watching it with Cloud Insights, you can turn on cloud compliance and you can scan for PII or HIPAA compliant data that you need to report on or potential GDPR violations. And the final thing that we've integrated into this kind of this whole cockpit and suite of offerings is something called SaaS Backup. Look, most of us use Microsoft 365. It's a great platform. Millions of users around the world. 52% of users, according to 451 Research, think that their SaaS data is backed up for them by the SaaS provider or the hyperscaler. So 52% of people say, I don't back up my Teams. I don't back up my SharePoint. I don't back up my OneDrive. Microsoft does that. Microsoft provides an incredibly resilient world-class architecture. You should probably feel a high level of comfort if their data center has an issue. But your data is your responsibility. If you had an issue with your data due to things like user error, insider threat, ransomware, it's kind of your ball of wax. You might have seen what happened in July of this year when a KPMG sysadmin in the UK accidentally hit a button and deleted 5,000 Teams accounts for the last 2 years. 2 years worth of data, gone. Nothing. Microsoft says that was your responsibility to back that up. We don't do that. What happens if you have a user that when he's leaving is a disgruntled user and right before he quits, he decides to delete the SharePoint that his team has access to with confidential data? You're kind of out of luck. So there's lots of things that can go wrong. And when you're faced in an enterprise with bringing a workload into the centralized, either the data center or the cloud, that's the time to look at, are we doing the right things around the information management? So what we've done is integrated one of our offerings called SaaS Backup. And SaaS Backup, just like it says, it will back up that SaaS data from Exchange, from Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., Planner, so that you're protected against those kind of things, including ransomware attacks. For example, somebody allows ransomware into a SharePoint and you're now held hostage. You can say, all right, the guy did it at 4 o'clock today, let's roll back to noon, or whenever the last snapshot was taken according to the policies that you have. It gives you that level of granular control and lets you take that basically and keep it with unlimited retention, unlimited capacity for $3.75 per user per month. It's a pretty strong value proposition. Is it part technically of the VDI technology stack? Not really. It's part of what happens, however, when you take hundreds or thousands of users and bring them into one place and say, what are the paradigms I need to put in place to manage that? And so that's the approach we're taking in saying, what does the admin need to have and know about, and which tools does he or she need to have at their fingertips? Mike, show us an example of one or two of these.
Okay, so we just talked about Azure NetApp files. I'm in the Cloud Insights product now. We've done the integration between VDS, so I'm running VDS over here on this tab, and Cloud Insights here. We're going to start bringing some of this data back into VDS, but there's a lot of power with Cloud Insights because I can use this as a data collector for a lot of stuff. So VDS collects 3 buckets full of data. One is from the public cloud provider or the on-prem machine at the virtualization layer. So we read that API for things like CPU and RAM. We can read the VDS API itself, so we know a lot about sessions, how many users are on, what the sessions are running in terms of applications. So we combine that in. And then we have an agent on each machine, so we can run any performant data we get from those, user latency, disk queue length, all that type of stuff. We can report that back to the Cloud Insights. So if you think about these administrators with end users, you can't walk down the hall and check out a misperforming machine down the hall. You have to actually do it remotely. So using these data elements allows us to do that stuff. So two quick examples here. One is that when we talk about ANF, part of the challenge is how much capacity and throughput do I need? Capacity is pretty easy. You can figure out the pack rat, you figure out the people who don't need a lot of space, put those together, get the capacity. But then the throughput, we have to make sure that we have enough for the events. The beginning of the day when everybody logs in, and we have to pull up those profiles, pull the data in for the applications, and then at the end of the day when we're writing it back. So one of the things that we were focused on with this particular dashboard is exactly that. What kind of IOPS do I need as I go through different time periods? So right now I'm looking at the last 3 hours, but I can expand this to a day, a week, a month, and I can get that feedback so that I size ANF correctly. I can pick the right size of the 3 tiers. We also have the capability, because ANF can go up and down in size, we can use this data to inform a strategy to say, hey, run it at 4 terabytes on standard and then pop that up, say maybe, financial close for a finance group, pop that up to 6 terabytes at the ultra level because we have that much read-write going on during a very busy period, and then pop it back down. Can't really get that in your generic cloud storage components, but we can do that with either CVS or ANF. We can tell it, hey, I need more capacity or more throughput right now. So we use our Cloud Insights piece to look at that as we go through and do that. Other element, as Chuck mentioned, is we want to have sort of that alerting capability. I'll show it visually here because we can't get the email in time in the demo here. But you can see right here that this group of machines, this hostful group, is running a little bit hot when it comes to memory. I like to keep it below 70%. So this is an indicator over time for the administrator to take a look and say, okay, maybe take a look at the size of these machines and upsize them if this is going to be a consistent problem. So we can use the information we're collecting to either generate a usage pattern that allows us to size the resources correctly, not too big, not too small, because we're paying by the hour, but then also use it for alert situations. Something was normal, 30%, all of a sudden running 99% of either CPU or RAM for hours on end, usually an indicator that something's a runaway process or that we maybe have a malware approach. All those types of capabilities are at the fingertips of the administrator here. So we have a lot of capability, and we've just started to integrate some of this and form some of the context for it from the VDS side. So lots of great things to come from this product.
There's something I want you guys to pay attention to. Look at the top right of the screen. You'll see the netapp.com/belikemike. Look, what he showed you today is pretty cool. What he is able to do from that cockpit is powerful. That URL, it's not netapp.com, it's ntap.com/belikemike. You go there and you can fill out, and you or your VDI admins, whoever, can get access to a 30-day trial sandbox. Play with VDS. We're going to give you the account. Go there, fill it out. You fill out your name, address, and email. We will email you a URL, a set of credentials, and a startup. We've got an environment that either is in Azure or Google. We'll let you play with it for 30 days. 50 users, 30 days, knock yourself out. See the kind of stuff. I would love to get feedback from this group of delegates, from either yourselves or your VDI administrators or your end user compute guys about what can be done. I think they're going to be impressed because look, we've invested a lot in this space, again, because it's a tier 3 application set moving to tier 1, and our position being able to have hybrid and multi-cloud support, being able to have one cockpit that he showed you where you can deploy and manage VDI workstations on-prem, in Google, in Azure, in AWS seamlessly, and create kind of a logical superset across all of them. That's really unique. Being able to do that at enterprise scale, thousands or tens of thousands of users that are riding not on an IaaS file server I built in the cloud, but on top of Azure NetApp files, all flash disks that's running the most demanding workloads in the world, complete with a full stack automation so it can manage the application stack, the Windows images that Becky talked about, the underlying infrastructure, and using technologies that we're not going to have a lot of cloud waste. We're not going to have machines out there that are being used or over-provisioned when they're not needed. Gives you an end-to-end capability to work this thing and really take advantage of the full promise of VDI, either on-prem or in the cloud. There's a lot of people saying a lot of good things about it. I'm sure that your NetApp account teams or contacts are going to be able to give you some insight into that. You should know how to get a hold of Mike, myself, or Jeff, and we'll be happy to do any more with you.